Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Professor Bhugwan Singh, Mr. Anand Jayrajh, Dr. R.T. Govender, Dr. Deekshita Padalkar, Mr. CPVM Chunu, Mr. Piyush Khandelwal, distinguished guests, online viewers, namaskar and welcome to Pravasi Bhartiya Diwas celebrations. Indeed, today we celebrate Pravasi Bhartiya Diwas. Just a brief background about PBD or Pravasi Bhartiya Diwas. It is a day celebrated to observe Pravasi or the non-resident Indian, and it started in the year 2003 on the 9th of January by the Republic of India to mark the contribution of the overseas Indian community towards the development of India. The day commemorates the return of Mahatma Gandhi from South Africa to Mumbai on the 9th of January 1915. Established in 2000, it is sponsored by the Ministry of External Affairs of the Government of India and the Federation of the Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, the FICCI, the Confederation of the Indian Industries and the Ministry of Development in Northeastern region. A celebratory event is held on the 7th to the 9th January every other year in the Indian city. A forum of issues concerning the Indian diaspora is organized, and the Pravasi Bhartiya Saman Awards are given. Indeed, to commence today's program, I would like to introduce and invite our first guest speaker, and that is Professor Bhugwan Singh, who is a professor and a medical doctor based in Durban, South Africa. Namaste and welcome, sir, for your remarks today.
Thank you, Shruti, for this opportunity. I think that this is an important occasion. It's an occasion that comes at a time when there's much anxiety and there's much turbulence, socioeconomic turbulence that's actually evident in this country. Just a minute. Sorry about that. So this is an entirely appropriate moment, and I'm very, very pleased to have been afforded this opportunity. I think that from a perspective of a fifth generation Bhartiya from the erstwhile Union provinces, I can speak with a degree of conviction. And I would like at the very outset to state that although it has been punted, as this occasion has been punted as if for non-resident Indians, I think that it's important for those of us who have settled over here and who have been here for as long as those of us of Dravidian origin is to appreciate that there is a distinct division between those of us who have come here as indentured laborers from the Dravidian system and those of us that have come here as economic migrants. And I think it's important for us to know, because that history, my history of third, fourth, fifth generation Dravidians is poorly understood, and it is often conflated, and it has done a disservice to the wider Indian community, and I will elaborate. I think that in the diaspora, it is being increasingly recognized now that there is a distinct identities that are between merchant passenger Indians and those that have come more laterally with green cards, as in America. And at the very outset, I want us to make that point because our history has to be rewritten. In Bharat today, there is an important sort of movements that have been undertaken to rewrite history, to reappraise history. And I think it's imperative for us here in this country to have a similar mindset. I will elaborate. In terms of the role and responsibility of, as you advertise, of the Indian diaspora in South Africa, I think that it is entirely correct for me to say that we regard South Africa as our punya bhumi, our sacred land. This is our fatherland. And I think that we cannot, diverse or in any way distract from that. South Africa has been wonderful to those of us that have been here for over 160 years. There have been tremendous tribulations, tremendous trials, oppression, racism, neo-colonialism, which is well known. But this country has afforded many of us an opportunity to thrive, to attain a degree of our potential. Right? We've scaled the heights of academic excellence, and we continue to do so. In the same breath, let me say that Bharat is our Matra Bhumi, our motherland. And whatever we have done here, whatever we achieve here, is entirely because of our spiritual murings, our cultural origins, and so on. So we cannot separate the two. The theme of this address is the role and responsibility of the Indian diaspora. I've at the very outset, in my preamble, I've stated my discomfort with who is part of this diaspora in this country. I think that it is safe to say that those of us that have been here, as in my case, for up to 5 generations, our contribution has been stellar, has been monumental. And that is a legacy, that is courtesy of our cultural, our spiritual murings, our religious origins, and so on. I'm a trained surgeon. I've run the department of surgery at the local medical school, and I can say that without any conviction, that notwithstanding our very small population group, our contribution has been magnificent. We've trained far and wide. We've trained individuals from various backgrounds, from various parts of the country, from the continent, and even from different parts of the world. And in that manner, I think we've been exemplar Bharatiyas. We've done our motherland proud. Having said that, we've, to a large extent, we've also ensured that over our time, over our tenure here, we sustain our cultural position and our spiritual murings, and that's remarkable, giving the cruel separation from our Matra Bhumi. Remember that the Grimitias that are in this country, right, 3rd, 4th, 5th generations, have suffered more than any other people of Bharatiya origin in the world. Let us understand that. One of Gandhi's accolades, and his lawyer friend Hiram Polk said that we here are the helots of the British Empire, that no one had it as bad as that. But we've done tremendous, notwithstanding all that strife, notwithstanding the fact that we were totally separated, we've sustained, we've improved, and most important, we've identified with the local community. I honestly believe that many of the social discontents and so on here were largely the result of fabrications or political manipulations and so on. This may not be an appropriate platform to actually to elaborate on that, but I think that our collective poverty, our collective struggle have ensured that over the years, Africans and Indians have stood side by side, notwithstanding the tremendous, apprehensions that we see now. I am not in favor of quoting politicians, but I want to make this final quote. And this was written sometimes in March 1960, on the week after Sharpeville. And Sharpeville was when, the South African apartheid police mowed down African people during a protest. And this was Nehru speaking in the Lok Sabha, and he said, the people of Indian descent in South Africa, as we all know, have had to put up with a great deal of discrimination and suffering, and have resented that. But we must remember that the African people had to put up with something infinitely more than that, and therefore our sympathies must go out to them, even more to our own kind. And I think, I'll be upfront with you, I've questioned many acts of Jawaharlal Nehru, and many of his contributions today have come rightfully under the cosh. But this was a very profound comment. And again, it speaks of the position that our motherland took. Bharat took a stance against South Africa, putting in sanctions, disclaiming South African status. And it did that not because of Indians over here. It did it because it was the right thing to do. That it stood up, it played the ball, and it ensured that inequity and racism and all those things there were actually sort of fully and unequivocally addressed. And in that respect, in closing, I think that history that we have had, our contributions over here, and the fact that we have come from a very, very difficult past, that rewriting our history, the Dikshita history, will contribute a great deal to other South African races to appreciate that the stereotyping of Indians is entirely inappropriate, that the Dikshita history in South Africa, as opposed to the recent migrants, the NRIs and merchant class and passenger class, right, that our history is underpinned by unparalleled exploitation and dehumanization. And that is something that I think we, as who have come here under abject, dire conditions, have to put down, and I'm sure that will be an important contribution to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Bhugwan Singh, for your very profound, deep insight and remarks on today's theme, being the role and responsibility of Indian diaspora in South Africa. Next, we welcome for his remarks, Mr. Anand Jayrajh. Anand Ji is an attorney who presently lives and practices in Verulam, 30 kilometers north of Durban, and is married to Shirley Jayrajh with 3 children. He has always been involved in community work and projects and is associated with a number of organizations involved in community work. He has prepared and submitted a motivation on behalf of the 1860 Indentured Laborers Foundation, Verulam, to the Department of Higher Education to include history of Indian indenture in Natal in the school history curriculum. This idea was his brainchild and is under consideration by the authorities. So we welcome Mr. Anand Jayrajh today for his remarks on the role and responsibility of the Indian diaspora in South Africa.
Thank you, Shristi. Can you hear me clearly? Right, okay. Greetings to all the organizers, Dr. Yogi, the Indian Consulate, and all those involved in this project over here. That I'd just like to thank them for allowing me to participate in this PVD episode. Secondly, I'd just like to make a disclaimer. I was just telephonically informed at a short notice to do this presentation, so much of what I'm going to say will be from the top of my head, and I'll just rely on a few thumb notes that I have made. It's a very important topic, and I think it deserves a much more in-depth analysis than the time limit allowed us. But I'll try to quickly, briefly summarize my thoughts on this matter. As many of you already know, we South Africans of Indian descent owe our presence here largely as a result of the importation of the indentured laborers who were brought here to work on the sugarcane fields of the then colony of Natal. Now, this took place between 1862 and 1911. Now, from the late 1860s, of course, the merchant class of immigrants, whom Dr. had alluded to as known as passenger Indians, they paid their own passageway, and they also came to the colony of Natal, but they form a small minority of the diaspora here. Now, these pioneers and their descendants played an important role in the development of South Africa in every field and aspects of human endeavor. Now, these endeavors have straddled and included and not necessarily confined to things like history, the heritage, culture, economy, education, politics, agriculture, struggle against tyranny, oppression, fight for freedom, and so forth. Right? So every field you can think of, the Indian diaspora were involved in it. Now, we South Africans of Indian origin consider ourselves as integral part of this country, and we owe our allegiance and patriotism to South Africa. Right. Now, the role of the Indian diaspora in the present day South Africa. Now, in the limited time afforded to me, I will try to cover as quickly and briefly the aspects of my presentation. And now, what I can say is that we can take our cue and inspiration from our forebears and pioneers who faced and struggled against all odds to overcome obstacles and challenges that they faced at every turn in their lives. The examples are too many to mention, but I'd like to highlight one important seminal historical event that involved the diaspora and may very well encapsulate my message. And what I refer to is the 1946 passive resistance campaign lodged by, as the title suggests, in 1946 by the Natal Indian Congress and the Transvaal Indian Congress, spearheaded by Dr. Monty Naike and Dr. Yusuf Daud and many of the other stalwarts. Right. Now, this campaign was in opposition to racially charged laws that discriminate against the so-called Indians. Now, it will do well for those unfamiliar with the 1946 passive resistance campaign to read about it and get to know about it. Suffice to say, the strategy adopted during that campaign was in turn adopted in the subsequent National Defiance campaign of the 1950s by the African National Congress and other resistance and liberation organizations pitted against apartheid. Now, the nub of that strategy, amongst others, was passive resistance and mass mobilization. And it was this strategy that contributed to the eventual dismantling of apartheid in South Africa. Now, the role of the passive resistance campaign is often glossed over and is relegated to levels below what I would say the radar of public consciousness. Right? And therefore, it's important for us nationally to know about that, the importance of that. Now, many stalwarts and heroes have emerged in our history, too numerous to mention, but we can take inspiration from them. My message to South Africans of Indian descent, referred to the Indian diaspora, is that the struggle of life is an ongoing one. History has proven that. However, we can continue to contribute to the development and improvement of our beloved country by dedication, hard work, and commitment. We need to look no further than our history, learn from it, derive the inspiration therefrom, adapt to changing circumstances, but continue to serve South Africa and contribute to nation building in all spheres of endeavors which I have mentioned previously. And we can do that. We can and will do so, regardless of distractions from certain quarters. Right? Where necessary, resist any form of oppression and discrimination. We owe a great deal to our ancestral forebears for the sacrifices that they made to deliver to us a life far better than that they themselves enjoyed. We now owe it to our progenies to ensure that we make the necessary sacrifices so that they can in turn enjoy the fruit and benefits therefrom. Thank you very much and Prem Namaste to all of you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anand Jayrajh, for that very profound remarks on the role and responsibility of Indian diaspora in South Africa. Thank you so much, sir. Next, we have Dr. R.T. Govender, who is an advocate for social cohesion. Dr. Raj Govender is a social anthropologist, academic and researcher, executive director of Mzansi Empowerment, Enterprise and Social Cohesion Advocate, Government of South Africa, former director of the Arts and Culture, KwaZulu-Natal Department of Arts and Culture. So today we welcome Dr. R.T. Govender for his remarks on the role and responsibility of the Indian diaspora in South Africa.
Thank you so much to Srishti, our program director, the Consulate of India, Durban, the Swami Vivekananda Center, under the very, very able leadership of Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, who has been bringing about these research endeavors and the discussions since his appointment here a few years ago, and educating the public, not only in South Africa, but throughout the world. So thank you so much to my fellow panelists. It's an absolute delight to be sharing this platform here today to talk on a very, very important subject, the role of the Indian diaspora in South Africa. Now, at this point in time, I'd like to acknowledge with a deep sense of appreciation my forebears, my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, Tirubengada Pillai, indenture number 18212, and my maternal grandmother, Veliama Pillai, indenture number 18213, who hailed from Siruvallur in Polur in Tamil Nadu, and my paternal grandparents, Kistan and Parvati, who came from Sholinga. The reason why I need to acknowledge them is because they had the determination and perseverance to leave the motherland, India, and come to a foreign country like South Africa with all the hardships, because it was not a very, very comfortable journey coming from India to South Africa. They've been promised a whole lot of things here to come to South Africa. So much of attractions. So they left their family, they left their friends, they left their villages, they left their everything to come to South Africa under very, very difficult circumstances. The journey that was from India to South Africa, the ships were totally with a lot of discomfort. They arrived here and they were treated very badly by the colonial masters. But finally, they were put into barracks and they were put into sugar plantations, and they worked extremely hard and they planted the seeds for our development. The foundation that they've provided was a solid foundation in South Africa. And they were unselfish because despite the fact that they were not literate, they made sure that all their children and grandchildren were educated. And that is why I would like to pay homage to them. Right, so coming back to the diaspora. Yes, the South Africans of Indian origin owe a lot of credit to the Indians that left India. They came here, they've struggled, they've worked very, very hard. And at the end of the day, they've created a new community in a foreign land, in the adopted land. They've accepted everything and they've embraced the people, like my fellow panelists have said, they've embraced the local people here, and they've realized that the only thing that they can do is to continue living here. Now, one very, very important fact that a lot of people leave out, especially historians. Lots of people talk about the important role that Mahatma Gandhi played in South Africa as a barrister and forming the passive resistance movement and so on. Yes, we do acknowledge that. It is very, very important. But one very, very important historical fact that is sadly neglected is the fact that the Indian indentured laborer, when they came to South Africa, they had an opportunity of going back home after the 5-year indenture. That was one of the conditions. However, despite all the hardships and so on, the indentured laborers, most of them, including my paternal and maternal grandparents, opted not to go back to India, but rather to stay here in the adopted country and take advantage of that small piece of land that they've been given to start a new life in this country. And by doing that, they've created a new set of individuals, people that, like Mr. Anand Jayrajh is saying, that have contributed immensely in all spheres of the South African society, whether it's the scientific field, the medical field, the legal field, the economic field, the educational field. The people of Indian origin have played a pivotal role right up to today. And that is clear in any country where there's Indian diaspora. Take United States, for example. All the major corporate entities, people of Indian origin are at the helm of those organizations. Why? One very, very important factor, and that is the emphasis they played on education. Now, there's 3 very important factors that we need to look at when it comes to the Indian diaspora and the indentured laborers. The people of Indian origin, when they came to South Africa, 3 very, very important factors was pivotal in their lives. Firstly, religion. So when they came and they settled in the North Coast and the South Coast and other parts of South Africa, in the Midlands, in the interior, in Gauteng and Cape Town and so on, one very, very important factor they ensured was to build the places of religious worship. That is why today, dotted throughout the country in South Africa, you'll find temples that are established, whether it's North Indian or South Indian linguistic groups. They've created places for them to worship. And that is why, right up till today, we are at the moment observing the period of Kavadi. Why? Because of the seeds that were planted by the Indian diaspora when it came to religion. The second important factor was culture, right? Wherever they stayed, wherever the Indian diaspora or the people of Indian origin stayed, they created opportunities to teach the rudiments of music, dance, language, cuisine, etc. to their offspring. And that is why up till today, culture is thriving in South Africa. Whether it is classical Indian music or contemporary music and dance, etc., right up till today, this is being practiced unabatedly. Why? Because the emphasis that the indentured laborers played on culture. And the third very, very important factor was education. Despite the fact that they were not educated, they were unselfish. They made sure they created schools, because in those early days, the colonial governments did not provide free education for people of the Indian diaspora. Our indentured laborers, together with the passenger Indian families and so on, they took funds out of their own meager savings and they established schools to ensure that the children were educated. And by doing that, they've created a very, very educated sector of the South African society. And as I mentioned earlier on, they are playing a formidable role in that particular society. So what I always say, that it was not a very easy life, because lots of people, because they see the people of Indian origin live in good homes, they drive good cars, etc., they believe that we are very advantaged, in an advantageous position compared to the other groups. Why we were in an advantaged position is because of the manner in which our people, our indentured forefathers have ensured saving, because savings were critical. People save money to buy things. People save money to build homes. People save money to build schools, temples, etc. So it is that characteristic that is very, very important. But you will notice that that similar characteristic is visible in Mauritius, in Fiji, Malaysia, Singapore, wherever people of Indian origin. And as researchers, and I'm sure Dr. Dikshita Padalkar will be able to tell us more because she has researched the diaspora in throughout the different parts of the world, you'll notice there is a common element, the determination of the Indian diaspora, wherever they go, is to make it happen, to make sure that their families and their friends and they were well supported. So that is why today, as we acknowledge the important roles that the Indians played in this country, we need to also acknowledge that it wasn't just easy. It was a very difficult task. However, we need to also understand there were lots of challenges. 3 days ago, on Thursday, we observed our 73-year anniversary of the 1949 riots, where the Indians were targeted because of their, the role they played in society. They were targeted, and in the 1949 riots, lots of people of Indian origin were victims of racial discontent. However, we must not harbor that discontent throughout our life. We need to forget and we need to move ahead. Remember, we are now part of the South African society. Everything that we do, we need to making it possible that we need to embrace our fellow brothers and sisters. Yes, we have developed well. Very, very great organizations have developed, religious, cultural, and for example, in the economic sector, you have structures like the Tamil Business Warriors, for example, established here to make sure that people of Indian origin are given opportunities and their brothers and sisters are given opportunities in the business sector. We need to embrace all these new things, but we need to also make everything possible known to our young people that we are South Africans of Indian origin. Our first and foremost, we are South Africans. Our religious and cultural links are with India. We need to do everything possible to work in a socially cohesive society in South Africa and work together. We have one flag, and there's a South African flag, which you see partly behind me, right? We have one national anthem, which is the the national Nkosi Sikelel. We have the South African cricket team, which we support. Yes, there are sometimes we have people that have an identity crisis, and that identity crisis that we have is very suicidal. It's very dangerous in a situation where we are living in a country that we have adopted as our own. We need to work together in harmony, in solidarity, and we need to create more opportunities for dialogue so that we can strengthen our relationship in our adopted country. By doing that, then we'll be living in a peacefully cohesive society, and we won't have repetitions of what happened in July last year in Phoenix and other parts of the country, where there was racial disharmony because of some foolish ways in which people approach the situation. So we need to work together. So I thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Yogi and Srishti and Spiwe for providing this platform so that we can discuss. But like Mr. Jayrajh said, that the topic is so vast, it will be it will be impossible to try to encapsulate it in one session here, right? There need to be more discussions like this nature. But the fact that you have planted the seeds, the fact that you have created this platform for discussion, it is very, very important. And I'm convinced in future programs like this nature, we will be able to have discussions together with other cultural and race groups so that we can find a common ground as we move and strive towards being South African once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. R.T. Govender, for those very deep, informative remarks. We definitely indeed learned quite a bit from those facts and those statements that you did make. Thank you so much, sir, for that. Next, our guest speaker is Dr. Dikshita Padalkar, and Dikshita ji is a labor economist residing in Durban since 20 years. She has conducted empirical research on labor retrenchments and textile mill performance in Mumbai. She then facilitated project implementation and micro-enterprise development in South Africa. She has worked with tertiary, corporate and government, as well as community-based organizations. She founded her enterprise, Research Resources, and then co-founded a business incubator, BizFarm. Namaste and welcome, Dr. Dikshita Padalkar, today for your remarks on the role and responsibility of the Indian diaspora in South Africa.
Namaste. Namaste to the Cultural Center. Audible? Am I audible? Yes. Thank you. And namaste to all the panelists and a warm welcome to all the listeners and viewers. And I indeed would like to spell out my thoughts on this, because I do find this to be a very important initiative and topic to speak on. And I would like to begin with a post that was put up, a media post that was put up by the World Bank, with the words of David Malpass, the president. He said, putting more countries on a framework, on a favorable growth path will require international coordinated action and comprehensive policy response. And he also mentioned that the rising inequalities, particularly those after COVID, are harmful to the development journeys of nations. Now, it is in this context that I would like to speak about the role of the diaspora in South Africa. And I would also like to speak in context of the viewpoints expressed by the previous speakers, and in terms of the tremendous contributions made by more than 3 generations of Indians who have come to South Africa in whatever capacity. And therefore, all my points that I speak about is keeping this context in mind, and would like to spell out a way forward, given that I am a first generation entrant into South Africa. So I would rather spell out what are the ways we can take this massive contribution of the Indian South African forward, so that they do not have to hesitate to think whether they really are Indian or South African, or where do they belong, or whether to have another identity and so on. I think, and that would be my contribution to assuage some of the identity crisis issues that have been spelled out. And I hope I can make a humble effort towards that. So at the onset, I think the diaspora, how I would classify it, is threefold. One is the people of Indian origins, the PIO. Then you have the OCI, which is, again, let's say the last 5 to 10 years established category, is the PIOs who have accepted an OCI, which is the overseas citizen of India. And the third category, classified segment is the NRI, the non-resident Indian. Now, all these three are just difference in their status in terms of the diaspora, but they all have to come together to take the work of the diaspora forward. The NRIs may be OCI holders, that's also an option. And then the NRIs again you have 2 segments there. One is the people who represent an expatriate category, and then there's the other who come in as non-expats, who come in on their own. But without getting into the semantics of all this, so the diaspora, I think, is a comprises all these segments, and we have to think as one going forward. The diaspora is a collection of individuals, but given its muscle across countries, like you mentioned, Malaysia, Singapore, Fiji, etc., the diaspora can play an institutional role. And that is why what I spell out in terms of the role and responsibility of the diaspora in South Africa, I would look at it from an institutional viewpoint, where the collection of individuals in these different segments that I mentioned would have a role to play for themselves. Everyone would find themselves a role or an area to fit in. And that's how I would like to take this discussion forward. So I've tried to spell out in just 1 or 2 sentences first, in a nutshell, what this would imply for the diaspora, which is all these segments of people, at different stages in their lives or generationals in South Africa. This role and responsibility, as I spell out, it is to input and impact meaningfully towards the overall socio-economic development of the SADC region. And this by first seeking to understand the needs of the people, the real needs of the people. What do the people of SADC want and what do they need? Second is to become a net contributor to the development journey of SADC. And the third is by sowing the seeds of long-term global sustainability. Now, what the previous speakers have spelled out actually entails all of this. I mean, they've actually done this, and it's taken 3 generations and more. So of course, it is a long-term effort, but here we are now looking at it in a new environment, in a new scenario, in a post-COVID scenario, and with global sustainability being the emphasis, given the historical realities. So first, and now we're talking about going forward. So we're talking about the new entrants into the diaspora who have come in the last, let's say, 20 years since post-94. And we're also talking about the entrance into South Africa from India who will be coming going forward. So they've got to learn first. You learn and then think of earning. So for the emphasis on learning is extremely important because South Africa is not the same as India in many aspects. So we can't suddenly come into this country and say we want to earn. We've got to learn and then earn, and then comes the plowing back. We've got to then plow back. So, and I think the role of the South African Indians would be very much appreciated in the learning aspect involved, because we've got to, the new entrants into South Africa post-COVID would have to understand the immense contributions that have already gone into this development effort of the past 3 generations of the Indians in South Africa in whatever capacity they may have come. The other thing that going forward, the diaspora that comes into South Africa from India or any other country, but the other of Indian origin, they have to keep in mind is that South Africa is a country with a high Gini coefficient, meaning very high inequality is starkly visible. So you will actually see spatial inequality, you will see different inequality in housing, in education, in access to public transport. And then there is a missing middle. There's a missing African middle, to be precise, which has, of course, grown since the late 90s, but it's still, one can see a visibly absent African middle. Now, the Indian diaspora, the members of the Indian diaspora who come in, who have been here, as well as those who come in, are generally privileged, I would say, but not correct, absolutely a correct word, but are generally would fit into the middle, and therefore they can have the ability, and they must play the role of building social bridges between the different groups that exist across extreme living standards in this country. I think the social bridges between the different groups at different living standards is important, given the high Gini coefficient and the effects of which are highly visible. So where do we begin? I think as a diaspora, the role and the responsibility going forward, where do we begin? We begin with investment to take the economy forward post-COVID. We begin with investment not just the financial sphere, financial investment on the markets, but investment in developmental projects which span across the SADC region, whose canvas spans across the SADC region. This also ties in with the role of developmental state that South Africa has often talked about in the pre-COVID phase, probably in the decade of 2000. And we start with investment to reboot trade, because trade is what has become disaligned during COVID. And we have to realign the supply chain of bilateral trade or multilateral trade such that we are able to focus on the long-term objectives. And we realign this trade focusing on food commodities, like rice, millets, oil, in terms of trade we are talking. Now, to align this with long-term objectives, that is rebooting trade to be aligned with long-term objectives, this will involve economic development initiatives and economic empowerment initiatives, which talk to the South African constitutional priorities. Economic development initiatives and economic empowerment initiatives, which are both long-term, transformative, and broad-based. And therein comes the role for not just the diaspora, but for India as well, to become, to ensure that the diaspora plays a role in South Africa. So what are the economic development initiatives that we can think of at this juncture? Development assistance towards integrated development. These are areas where India has a track record for over 60 years. So it's not rocket science, actually, in terms of when you're talking about it, but it's a different issue when you're doing it. But development initiatives which talk towards integrated development will also align with what the World Bank message stated, that we need an integrated policy response. Now, what are some of these areas? Let's take on the one hand, you can talk about the role that land development banks have played in India, the role that the public distribution system has played in India, the employment works programs, and also on the other hand, agro-marketing cooperatives that have existed, the role of microcredit institutions, and small farmer development. I mean, all this would be, of course, relevant to the SADC region. I don't see a reason why some of these development initiatives can't be relevant to the SADC region. And if they do exist in South Africa or SADC, I think the collaboration can only enhance the effectiveness of these programs. So that's about economic development initiatives. Then you look at economic empowerment initiatives. So here we are talking of corporate sustainability. This is in the form of enterprise development, corporate sustainability through enterprise development, which is done through incubation. We're talking also about compliance with the BEE codes, which is the government regulatory framework. Again, you're talking now as the diaspora to the South African developmental priorities. And so there's no issue of conflicting identities and where I belong and some of these issues coming up again. And then you're talking about corporate sustainability through corporate social responsibility initiatives, which are often undertaken and which have been undertaken to address the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Now, the diaspora must demonstrate effective implementation here, because talking about it at this forum is one thing, but when often some of these initiatives over the last 20 years, as I have seen, often fall back due to ineffective implementation or to seeing it through. I mean, the continuity doesn't carry on. So effective implementation we need across a range of areas, such as labor-intensive industries. We need to roll out strategy initiatives such that some of these labor-intensive industries are revitalized after globalization 1.0, where a lot of unemployment had to be dealt with. Then there's also been initiatives on small-scale manufacturing, where I remember the National Small Industries Corporation, members of the NSIC from India had visited, and there were initiatives for small-scale manufacturing in areas of toilet roll making. And there have, in fact, I'm also aware of the present-day diaspora having done some conceptual work. I mean, South Africans of Indian origin who have done some conceptual work around small-scale manufacture of diapers and sanitary pads through recycled material. I think some of these ideas are at the conceptual stage and are highly relevant to the needs of the SADC region and can be taken forward with involvement of the diaspora, the South African government, and the Indian government. So we talked of labor-intensive industries, small-scale manufacturing, and then follows what is known as knowledge intensification of this manufacturing, which is essentially digitization of the production processes, innovation. All these are areas where collaborative work can get involved, and the diaspora has an important role to play. So one doesn't need to really think, oh, do we have a role to play? Is there something that we can do, or what happens to our children going forward? And I think these are very important issues for the South Africans, the Indians in South Africa. And in knowledge intensification, I think I cannot but emphasize the need for STEM skills, that is science, technology, engineering, management skills, the transfer of skills in the STEM skills through online and through coaching and mentoring. Online is, of course, taken off in a big way, but online works when there's an intrinsic motivation in the student. Very often we are faced with students who are not intrinsically motivated, but still have to be imparted basic STEM skills, where they are not able to be intrinsically motivated because of the role that their parents or their families are unable to play in their academic journeys. So the role that the diaspora can and play in the transfer of STEM skills, as I see it over the past 20 years, cannot be emphasized, and is extremely critical. Whether you do the economic development initiatives and the empowerment initiatives, everything else will build on a sound foundation of STEM skills: science, technical, engineering, management skills. And as I said, to the management skills, that to top of all these initiatives, we need expertise, excellence in public management. Public management in areas of public health, public education, of course, but also planning and research skills, transport, public management of transport. I mean, the two-wheeler and the three-wheeler and the bicycle industry market is waiting to be tapped here in SADC. And I mean, if I could see this about 15 years ago, that there's a market here for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, I mean, after 20 years, there's an even bigger need to take the issues in public transport or two-wheeler markets forward. And we need to get the brains in the industry to address this issue. I'm sure, I hope this issue can be addressed. And this is a need of the people. As I said, we've got to address the needs of the people if we have to move forward as a diaspora. So we've talked about public management. So I'm not leaving private management behind. So let's talk about corporate sustainability and youth development. So, I'd like to unpack the issue of corporate sustainability and youth development a little bit, because A, there are strengths in these areas, and B, it is a real bottleneck that we are currently facing post-COVID. So what do I wish to unpack here? South Africa has developed sound, hard infrastructure in high schools, in vocational institutions, and in sector education authorities, which are vocational education institutes are called the TVET colleges, and sector education are called the CETAs. And they've got a very, very robust infrastructure. But that's the hard infrastructure. Of course, there are challenges and historical challenges as well. But these institutions are now in the process of transitioning from being inward looking to becoming global successful benchmarks. And in this journey, what they need is soft infrastructure. Soft infrastructure, we mean everything pertaining to the skills development architecture that goes into the bricks and mortar buildings that exist. So we need, as digital enablers, we need insights on macroeconomics and management case studies and so on. Coaching and mentorship, of course, again, I cannot overemphasize that issue. So the reason for this is that why we need the soft infrastructure and the hard infrastructure, and with regards to corporate sustainability, is so that the youth can get absorbed into the corporate environment. Yet the youth till now in the last 20 years have largely got absorbed into government employment, but there are limits to government employment, and therefore the corporate sector has to step in to address the issue of youth and employment. And here, as I said, the hard infrastructure exists. It's the soft infrastructure that needs to come in to up the game for the youth as well as for the corporates in South Africa. This will also be an opportunity for Indian youth going forward. So it's, I mean, the Indian youth will be, can come in through different programs that can be sponsored by the corporates, and they will be given a global exposure. They will also be able to transfer some of their learnings with the youth in South Africa. So this is what I've basically unpacked is over the last 20 years, given that the South African Indians were kind of de-linked from India since their 1947, let's say. What is it that I, as who have come in the past 20 years, can say this is how the Indians in South Africa can move forward as the diaspora and contribute to the development of the SADC region or South Africa in particular. Now, we also need to see where the Indians can, where the India can learn what India can learn from the success stories of South Africa. And I'll spell out a few there. Of course, there are success stories in direct cash transfers, the social grant system, including a working model for UIF. I think that's where something we can look at. The CETA architecture, sector education is an excellent, because that is the challenge going forward. The CETA, the Sector Education and Training Authority, is the challenge going forward. How do sectors that are changing so fast skill the people? Because technology is changing fast, sectors are changing fast, production technologies are changing fast. How do we keep employment at pace with changing needs of sectors? And then you have a lovely ocean economy where so many countries along the Indian Ocean, the rim of the Indian Ocean. So you can, there's lots to learn from bioconservation, marine conservation. And of course, as has been said, India has a lot to learn from the cohesion that has existed in the Indian community of South Africa. And that has been spelled out by the previous speakers. I think there's a lot that the Indians who come from India in the years ahead must seek to learn from the Indian community of South Africa, and the Indian community in South Africa will always be welcomed in India for this contribution that they have been able to build over generations in a cohesive way. And for the diaspora to succeed going forward, I'll just spell out a few liners, and I think I'll conclude with that. They need to think global and act global. They have to be inclusive and non-discriminatory. Hardworking and enterprising goes without saying, as has been the case with previous generations. Anticipate challenges. Challenges are a given. So to think that we can carry this work forward without challenges I don't think that's possible. Develop social networks, support networks. I think that's very important for the Indian diaspora going forward. I think that Indian South Africans have a role to play here, because the support networks that they can provide to the new youth from India who will be coming into South Africa going forward, hopefully, I think the Indians in South Africa will be able to provide the support networks that we require. I think it's also important that the diaspora involve other countries. I mean, we don't need to only involve India. We can involve a host of other countries who would like to take part, to get involved with some of these development initiatives. And for this, we require cultural openness. Cultural openness is going to be the game going forward. And at the end of the day, we have to appreciate the liberties and the opportunities that are given. And if we can take this forward in a very humble way, I think the diaspora will be the field ambassadors for India, for which the returns are unimaginable. And therefore, I conclude with what Nelson Mandela once said, that to be free is not merely to be cast off one's own chains, but to live in a way that enhances the freedom of others. And if we can put this together, tie up everything that has been said today, then we have a platform for going forward with a very meaningful agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Deekshita Padalkar ji, for your remarks today. With that, we've come to the close of Pravasi Bhartiya Diwas celebrations. I'd like to invite Mr. Sipiwayam Chunu from the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban to render this evening's vote of thanks.
Namaskar and greetings to all of you. On behalf of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, I am honored today to deliver a vote of thanks on Pravasi Bhartiya Diwas celebrations. Allow me to thank our online guest who took part on today's program, Professor Bhugwan Singh, a medical professor who gave remarks on role and responsibility of Indian diaspora in South Africa. The remarks that Professor Bhugwan Singh ji gave were very wonderful. And when I listened to him, he made a clear call for all of us to work together. So if all of us can unite and hold one another's hand, we can reach we can go in so many places. So to Professor Bhugwan Singh, Dhanyavad for those wonderful remarks that you gave this evening. Secondly, allow me to thank Mr. Anand Jayrajh, an attorney from Durban, South Africa, for his telling remarks also that he gave on the role and responsibility of Indian diaspora in South Africa. Thank you, Jayrajh Ji. Now allow me to thank Dr. R.T. Govender, an advocate for social cohesion, for his wonderful remarks also. What I noted to his speech, again, he stressed too much on the need for all of us to work together and embrace one another. So to Dr. R.T. Govenderji, Dhanyavad, thank you very much for those wonderful remarks that you gave this evening. Lastly, allow me to thank Dr. Dikshita Padalkar, who is a director of Dr. Padalkar Research Resources, for her wonderful remarks also that she gave this evening. She covered everything. So, ma'am, in your remarks also, I picked up that you are stressing on a point of togetherness, of oneness, of cooperations, whereby South Africa can learn from India, whereby India can learn from South Africa. On that, thank you very much, ma'am. What you said today, it was very, very true, and it was also noted to all of us. To that, Dhanyavad, ma'am, thank you very much. To Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Ms. Sristi Harinarayan, Sri Piyush Kandelwal, Dhanyavad for taking part on today's program. Now allow me to thank all our online participants who took part on today's program. All of them are kindly advised to visit ICCR in Durban Facebook page for more information on cultural activities organized by Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center in Durban. Once again, to Bhagwan Singh Ji, Mr. Anand Jayrajh Ji, Dr. R.T. Govender Ji, and Dikshita Padalkar Ji, Dhanyavad for taking part on today's program. To all of you, have a wonderful evening. Namaskar.